Society Forum at Sonoma State. I see some folks from I haven't seen in a while in this room, so welcome and welcome back. I'm very excited today to be welcoming Irene Klaver, who is the professor of philosophy at the University of North Texas. She's here today to speak as part of this sort of water initiative on campus. In fact, her visit is in part funded by the Waters program here. Professor Klaver is the director of the Philosophy of Water Project and the UNESCO IHP advisor for water and cultural diversity, and she is the co-director of the International Association for Environmental Philosophy. The title of her talk today, as you can see, is called Meandering: Rivers as a Bridge to an Environmental Imagination. Water is obviously a crucial issue for us here in California. The environment more broadly is a crucial issue for us. So we're very pleased and privileged to have her. So please join me in welcoming Irene Klaver.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here. It's exciting to be in a state that has so many water problems. My own state, Texas, and actually my own country is the Netherlands. That's the accent you hear, so you don't have to wonder anymore, where is she from? She's not just from Texas, no, she's from the Netherlands originally. So I was born with water, and actually we are all born with water, so that's a good thing. That brings us all together here. I made a PowerPoint for you guys to talk about actually water, and I'm really pleased again that actually part of this talk is funded by a water program and a water agencies. I really think thinking about water means thinking interdisciplinarity, thinking interagency, thinking with, and that will be an important theme of the talk. How do we think with each other, with the environment, with all the kind of policies, agencies, ethics, legal issues? All the issues need to be thought together in order to understand and deal with our water issues. And that's really daunting and really exciting. So I'm really pleased that I'm actually partially funded by that with this talk. So. As I say in the title, I see rivers as a bridge to environmental imagination. So we are not going to talk about environmental ethics pur sang as such, but about the imagination, what I call environmental imagination, as a bridge to thinking about water. I made a lot of slides, and we will go through a lot of them really fast to give you a flavor, an idea about imagination in terms of images, in terms of a notion of environment, imagination as a cultural vehicle to understand how we live with water. So there we go. Water in our culture. Can you guys see it? Is that water out of sync? I always tell my students, if you want to know what is going on in society, in a culture at large, and that's what I call environmental, or what I call cultural imagination, based upon some actually anthropological terminology, literary terminology. Interdisciplinarity means like dealing with a lot of different fields. You have, in order to understand what goes on in a culture, you have to understand how advertisement works, how the big business works. It's not for nothing that these high-end stores, H2O, are called H2O. They have done a lot of, they might be better, right? They have done a lot of research after what is in a name. This is a cosmetic store. When you go in there, it's like French cuisine. There's almost nothing there, because that's really special. It's very nice and sleek and modernist, etc. And when you want to buy a kind of cream for your face that keeps you forever young with algae and sea salt and name it, whatever, you pay like $30, $40, $50. And very, very interesting that they call that store H2O. Not for nothing. Water is in our cultural imagination. Definitely since the last 20 years. This is a relatively new phenomenon. This store would not have called H2O 40 years ago, because at that moment water was not that cool. Now it's cool. because it's a problem also. But problems can be cool. So what we are going to do here is to think with water as a connective medium. So water connects biodiversity, cultural diversity, social economic development. It connects real places with ideas and ideals. It is also connecting engineered hydraulic space with cultural experience and everyday practice. We walk on water, like Jesus did. But our walking on water is walking over pipes. A little less magical, but everywhere where you walk on pipes, you walk on water. So thinking, being, living with water. That is what I, as a philosopher, want to think through. More than just environmental ethics, more than just water ethics, but what is our, in philosophical terms, and I know some of you take philosophy courses right now, what is the ontology, epistemology, ethics of water? I'm not going to explain all those terms because we don't have the time for it, but you have philosophical experts in your university, so you can always go to them to understand all these things. It's not necessary to understand my talk. Of what is really interesting, I think, when we think about water, is that we have to think about infrastructure. People forget that sometimes. In our time and age, we could not have a relationship with water without infrastructure. The water comes out of your faucet, you flush it in your toilet. That's the basic, for some people, the only relationship they have to water. It comes out of your shower head. You might get rained on, but maybe not that often anymore. But the main relation with water is an engineered relationship to water, which can be, again, a very exciting relationship. And that will be part of my talk, how we can reinvent that relationship as a living relationship instead of just a pipe relationship. So there we go. It connects living water with engineered hydraulic space. That is important because that gives it the opportunity to mediate, to bridge, to link humans' culture, nature, environment. My notion of ethics is a larger notion of ethos, a larger cultural practice and mentality related to social cultural imagery. And the basic kernel of my talk is to reimagine an ethics, an ethos, as well as our way of living with water. This has local and global components. So we're going to go fast over some of these local and global components. As Josh said in his introduction, I was one of the initiators of this particular international hydrological project of UNESCO, that's the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization in Paris. I worked there for a year and set up this particular program in the International Hydrological Program, which is one of the major pillars of UNESCO, which is focused mainly on hydrology, engineering, and water scientists. They do not do much cultural components in their approach. And they realize that they do have to do that in order to get more traction, in order to get, let me go back a little bit. They realize that they have to think about, we're going the wrong direction. Still going in the wrong. Thank you.
Right there.
Previous, yes. Sorry. There we go. We were right here. So I worked with folks. We set up a work group to actually introduce more cultural components in this very engineering-based program, which is one of the most important programs of UNESCO. As you might know, more people die still of waterborne diseases than of any other diseases. Definitely more than of Ebola right now, even. And that has everything to do with infrastructure, with the lack of infrastructure, with the lack of wastewater treatment plants in a lot of places in the world, with lack of fresh water supply. with pipes again. It was a very successful program. We edited this book. You can get it now for free online, which is good because it's very expensive. The point that we made was that there's a lot of cultural relationship to water. Actually, all the relationship with water is cultural. Religious, festivals, lots of rites, and lots of different cultural aspects to water. In my approach to this, because my fellow folks from these kind of groups were almost all anthropologists, I was the only philosopher, I approached it from cultural criticism perspective and looked actually at urban aspects, which is very interesting because almost every self-respecting city nowadays has a river festival, if they have a river going through town, all over the world. And we launched actually our program during the Brisbane River Festival, one of the largest river festivals in the world. We worked with people from New Orleans to set up a so-called river sphere, and I really like that term because it means like an atmosphere around rivers, a big place where you actually can work together with a variety of communities of people and scientists, artists, local folks, etc., all around actually the Mississippi in this particular case. So the idea, the philosophical idea behind this is that you, through these connective practices, these connective cultural events, which can be religious events. There are big water festival all over the world. They facilitate involvement, engagement, and engagement which hopefully leads to an understanding of one's larger watershed, an understanding of the way that water flows in, through, and out of your life. That is what we wanted to accomplish, that kind of engagement. Engagement is a first step to political engagement, to make people aware to how to think about the structure of their water bases in their own lives, in their own communities, in their own state, in the world as large. So the idea was that rivers influence lifestyles, but lifestyles also influence rivers. A vision of an inspiring image of a desired future, a reimagination of rivers, of water. And I chose rivers in this particular case because it is a particular water body that we actually can see, that we can go to, that we can engage with. I actually made a film with a couple of people about river relationship of all kinds of different rivers in the world, the Amazon, Danube, Ganges, etc., all with that common theme of how do people relate to their water body, to their culture, their river identity. The notion of culture that we used in this context was not necessarily cultural heritage, but culture as a capacity to aspire, to think about a future together. There's a lot of work done in philosophical theories about the notion of capacity. A lot of different philosophers who think about it, but not in this sense of the capacity to aspire, how that's actually a necessary element to have a lively culture, to have a future, to think about the future. For me, it's very critical for my understanding of my water philosophy. It's trying to think through how we can have a relationship with water that focuses on a future, a capacity to aspire, which is predicated upon transitions, about things changing, translations, transformation, in short, change. Change in terms of always changing. So not a radical change of your whole life, but your whole life is always changing. If you want it or not, you're getting older. How can we facilitate these kind of changes in and through our engineering of these changes? That is kind of at the kernel of my talk, that relationship between facilitating changes in and through our engineering changes, to make that engineering actually related to our own changes. How can innovation or renewal be facilitated? How can we recreate, reimagine our relationship to water, including infrastructural water? How can we have a relationship with our pipes? You might think like, well, she wants a relationship with her pipes. Yes, very exciting with her whole infrastructural setup. We will come back to that. So that means, last but not least, how can we create situations, places for local and focal experience of water? Because only through experience we learn. That's our way of relating to water. As I said, almost every self-respecting river, every self-respecting city is connecting to rivers. My own city, in the last 20, 25 years, when I was a student there in the 1980s, I'm older than you think I am, I was a student there, nothing of this was there. This is all last 20, 25 years. Almost every city is reconnecting to its water. There's a lot of money in there. A lot of, in that sense, also environmental justice issues. Because usually poor people lived along the rivers. They are almost all of them elbowed away because riverfront property is very desirable. High prices that people pay for living there. You and I couldn't probably not afford to live there. Maybe when we would all live together, but I don't know if I would want to live with all of you and you want to live. You're nice, but you know. So that's a big issue. Look how gorgeous I have. When I go home, I have always a glass of wine on that I Film Institute. You look out over the river, the I River, which is still a functioning river in Amsterdam. So big boats come by. You know, it looks like whoa, fascinating. Like economics is alive. It goes steamboat up and down the river. This is all, as I said, new. With this comes a lot of restaurants all along the I, in really beautiful places like old, oil islands, etc. They are now restaurants. Really cool. Not only in Amsterdam, everywhere else. Culture as a capacity to aspire, as I said. Well, I mentioned already that comes with a lot of potential environmental justice. Very important for your center of law, because you have to think like who is making the decisions? Only the experts. The experts are usually seen as the hydrologists, the scientists, the urban planners, the developers. What about you and me? Do you have to become an engineer in order to be heard? Happily, no, not necessarily, but actually maybe still for a big part. So one of the philosophical questions is how can actually normal people, low-income people, become beneficiaries of these kind of projects? How can they participate in these kind of projects? How can even entities that have no voice at all, like the birds, the fish, the water itself, how can those entities participate in those projects? Big, exciting, philosophical, political, legal, ecological questions. And I would add infrastructural questions. I'm going to go fast over this. The LA River is actually a really nice example of this urban renewal planning from a pretty good approach in terms of including lower income folks. What I, as a philosopher, find really interesting, and that this is kind of, we are now inching to an important part of my talk. What I find as a philosopher really interesting is this little word re. A lot of my philosophy is about reconnecting, reinventing, restoring our relationship. The word with is very important, and the word re. We have done things in a certain way, we can redo things in another way. We can renew ourselves. And, I think that the Department of Water and Power must have read my philosophy, because This is on their flyers. No, I'm just kidding. They will not read anything of my work. But apparently this is in the air, so that's good. That's a really good thing, to reimagine our relationship to water, to reconnect. Look how beautiful. Reclaim, revitalize, reimagine even. My favorite term, reimagine. It's on that flyer. Maybe some kind of lower pioneer read some of my work. Probably not, but it's cool. Revitalizing, reconnect, you see? Really beautiful. Come on. Even in my current hometown, Dallas, Texas, we are reconnecting to the water. We don't do as good a job as Los Angeles actually did. It's more top-down planning. It's not really community planning, unfortunately. But, at least we are doing something, and it's not totally bad. There's a Trinity River, muddy, really very low on the totem pole in Riverland in Texas. We have the Rio Grande, we have the Brazos River, all kind of films and movies, books about it. Trinity River, no, nothing. Nothing about it. It's muddy, stinky, slimy, mosquitoes, alligator gar and whatever. But it's our river, and it's actually most of the fresh water delivery at the major cities in Texas comes from the Trinity River. But, very interesting, Dallas has one of the highest water uses in the country, in the world, 260 gallons per person per day. Why is that? Usually I spend a whole class on this, but we don't today. And I ask people why that is. Watering the lawn. And this is very important for my argument, because that means that a mentality, what I call the cultural imagination, the way people think about water, the way they think that water just is there or not or whatever, that is so crucial in water behavior, the use of water. Watering the lawn, because they want to have a lawn like in, the folks at the East Coast, because that's a sign of wealth and of progress and of being one of us. That has everything to do with what I call cultural imagination. That's why cultural imagination and changing the cultural imagination, making people aware of what their values are, why that is so important. So Texas, the Trinity River has a corridor project and a very nice renewal around the river, all very upscale but very, very beautiful. We got already a Calatrava bridge. Calatrava is a very famous Spanish architect. Signature bridges, they call it. Every self-respecting city has now a signature bridge. We do have one. There it is. I was at the openings night day, not at the openings night because you had to buy a ticket for Lyle Lovett. I'm a big fan of Lyle Lovett. I love his music, but I'm not going to pay $100 to go there. $200, I see. The next day it was free for normal folks like you and I, and the bridge was open. It was actually really nice. I was a little disappointed with Lyle that he didn't play on the next day also for us normal folks, but So this is what happens with that bridge, it becomes a signature bridge. Like every self-respecting company is now advertising with the bridge in the background. Isn't that cool? The Land Rover with our bridge, that's our bridge. You didn't know that. If you see this at your dentist or whatever, then think about that talk of that woman. I don't know what her name was anymore, but she talked about that bridge. There we go. See, it's not just Dallas, not just the very upper scale towns or even Fort Worth. Every self-respecting city is doing it. San Antonio, all transforming Texas through transforming the waterfronts. And these flyers, if you look at the detail, and as a philosopher I spell out the linguistics of it, like what kind of language are they using? They talk about signature bridges all over, all those flyers. It's fascinating. So, actually, I don't live in Dallas, but in Denton, that's a little satellite town. north of Dallas, where my university is, a big university, 36,000 students, really huge. Well, we don't have a signature bridge. We are really a poor town. But we have detention ponds. And it sounds really kind of like, what the heck is detention ponds? That's where they hold prisoners or whatever, you know? No, detention ponds are all over the country. They are meant to keep the water that flows otherwise in town after a major rainfall. It's an infrastructural pond to actually collect drainage water. Well, what we did around our detention pond was to create a potential place of connection as the major Trinity River project in Dallas, with all its high-powered upscale whatever, to do on a very low-scale level, see what we can accomplish in terms of creating a relationship to local water bodies that are, in this case, very low-key, very low-scale. But how can you have a relationship with those that creates a public space? Public space is something that we are lacking so much, especially in Texas. You know, our main public spaces are malls, but not many public spaces in terms of a public square, places where you meet by accident other folks you have never met, you know. Well, our idea was to think about re-imaging our detention pond, to see it as a public space where you actually meet other folks, that functions as a public space. There we go. Reclaiming, remember the we called it reclaiming water infrastructure, reconnecting the visible, invisible, and the potential, remember that capacity to aspire, around a detention pond. Well, those detention ponds, as I said, they are actually managed by the soil conservation departments, and they are on the map as just Soil Conservation Service Hickory Creek Basin Retarding Pond, number 16. You would not go there. If you see that on a map, like you drive, you have never been in Denton, you drive through town, you're not going to go to SCS 16, you know, why should you? I mean, come on. But if you knew how it was, this is CSC 16 at work, you know, getting a floodwater all through town. But look, when you create a space, people, animals, plants, everyone comes. It's like a bird feeder, you know, you put food out and there they come. Similarly here, it's a public place. A lot of people are here every day. Even a beaver moved in. Actually, a whole family of beavers moved in. Every night they patrol the pond. We organized a whole show in a very interesting Dallas gallery about the life at the pond, so to say. And this is not, Thoreau's pond. This is a detention pond, like the lowest of the lowest. But it's a beautiful place where many people. These are some images. This is all around the pond. You see? Like a nature park, a little place. And there are people of all kinds of background, lower class, middle class, maybe not that many upper class, but, you know, this is very low class. Underwater, usually. But kids come for the prom night pictures. See? This is not a usual thing you see in around the lake, but they come there to have, lots of, Texas has a lot of birds. Come on. Another project around the infrastructure in town was around, you have probably these signs too, like no dumping in these areas because it drains to the stream. We started an awareness raising around, again, the infrastructure aspect. Very popular. Lots of kids collaborated on it. We handed out a lot of flyers about what exactly was at stake here, how we are related to those pipes. The main thing for me is that this is a way, I work together with the artist and with the city that put these shows on, and my main contribution was to make thinking a piping experience. Look what she did. This is an amazing banner. This is what we need to think about. This is what we need to think with. Thinking is not just something you do in your attic. It's thinking with pipes. And now I come to the last part of my talk, and we still have a little bit of slide to get, but this is the exciting thing, how we can thinking with pipes. And that's what I call a thinking as meandering. For a long time, we thought that our pipes are a symbol of the straight line, that the model of efficiency. And this is very important when you talk to engineers, and maybe some of you are in engineering studies or plan a career in it. Our model of efficiency is usually thought of the shortest connection between 2 points, right? That's the shortest line. What I want to argue here is that in a lot of thinking about and with water and with environmental issues in general, and maybe also with people issues actually, meandering is actually more efficient. And so the last part of the talk will be about that, about the efficiency of meandering. And this is a new model of efficiency. Actually, when you look at some information scientists, etc., they have actually for a while already been thinking in these terms, that we need this meandering space, this solution space, they call it in information science, in order to come to a concrete solution. And that's not necessarily the shortest line, the direct line. What is fascinating is, and I hope you didn't know this, because then you know a little new fact, is that meander is actually a real existing river. Who knew that? Hey, wonderful. Oh, you knew that. Oh.
You read your paper.
Oh, you read my paper. But before that, see, it's a real existing river. It's in Turkey, it's in Anatolia, and it's kind of right here, South Turkey. You know, this is like a complex area right now politically, but the meander goes right there. Well, in ancient Greek, this river was one of the most important rivers. And this is, for me as a philosopher that's interested in culture, so interesting, because the river meander itself completely meandered out of the cultural imagination. You and I don't even know anymore that it was a real existing meander river. It was the most important river. All the trade between East and West went through the Meander Valley. The major armies of Xerxes, Alexander the Great, they all went through this valley. At the beginning, where the Meander streams in the Aegean Sea, which is actually the end of the river, of course, that delta was one of the most important cities of trade, Miletus. That's where one of the first philosophers come from, Thales of Miletus. A little bit north of it is Ephesus. That's where Heraclitus came from, Heraclite. This is the beginning of philosophy, is right there. Why? Because of the Meander River. Really. Because that's what made that city flourish. That's the way we need to think about thinking. Thinking is not just, there's a very important philosopher. No, it's a reason why that philosophy originated there. It was because of the river, the Meander River. Completely meandered out of our cultural imagination. But it will be back there because of my article. No, I'm just kidding. Not because of my article. So I use the meander as a metaphor and as a model. And here is a real meander river. Turkey wants to become part of the European community. The whole European community has a water management program in their river management, which is called the Water Framework Directive. In order to become part of the European community, they have to do a lot of different things, but one of the things they have to do is to write management plans for all their rivers. So this is a river management plan for the Meander River. I just threw in a couple of slides to show you how this river is in Turkey a very living river, but not in our imagination. Meandering. This is a picture that we took from the plane a couple of days ago when we were on our way here. This is not a meandering river. This is the California Aqueduct. This is what the engineered space of water use looks like. This is, I think it is probably the San Joaquin River. You see the difference between a meandering river, and see in Europe where I'm from, a lot of rivers have to give back, a lot of cities and agricultural areas have to give land back to the rivers, as they call it. So they have to take out their waterways out of their infrastructural confinements to make space to re-meandering. And you see immediately, already from the plane, if you ever fly somewhere, take a seat at the window. I mean, it's so fascinating. You can see that when you let a river meander, immediately vegetation comes up. That means corridors for all kinds of life, plant life, wildlife, etc. Look at this, for example. This is one of the most fascinating pictures or maps about meandering. This was the Mississippi meandering river before they stratified it. Now it's a straight line in many of those. It's a huge issue because it always floods. It always gets out of its banks. That's what we're talking about. Back to the meander rivers. So this was the meander river. You see, it's like this is the floodplain. Miletus is right there. You see here, and right now it's not at the sea anymore because the river brings, besides water, also soil. That's what all rivers do. Actually, that's a very, very important function of rivers, because that means that you get always fresh soil, which is good for growing food, for the vegetation. Very important. That's why these symbols of the river gods are the cornucopia, the horn of plenty. That's their symbol. It's a symbol because the river gives water, not just water for irrigation, but also soil. So important. So Meander was a potamoi. He was one of the river gods in the ancient Greek mythology. There were very important baths, even in the Roman time of Miletus, after the colonization of Ionia, that part of Turkey, by the Greeks in 400, 500 BC. It was conquered by the Romans in like 100 BC and 100 all the way till the beginning of our times. And this was the wife of the emperor. Very important place, Meander River, still in early Roman period. Lots of important imagery. Artemis was an important goddess. In the 19th century, it became already a little bit forgotten, but there was an early 19th century travel writer who actually wrote extensively about the meander. There was but a kind of early romanticism, like going back to these ancient places. Nowadays it looks more like this. Very cheap tourism going from Europe all the way to Turkey. This is, at the same time they are doing their management plan, all kinds of land use. My point is summarized here, that I want to show how this local culture can relate to hydroengineering, how this particular meandering is a metaphor, a symbol for thinking about models of modernity, thinking about modernity in terms of either more Western or Eastern. How can we, in the 21st century, rethink a framework, a new mentality, a cultural imagination about our rivers, around all our water issues, our water thinking, that gives more room to rivers, that thinks about progress no longer in terms of utilitarian ways and simple control of nature, in which every drop of water that reaches the ocean is a waste. That was literally what President Roosevelt said. Every drop of water that reaches the ocean is a waste. That's a thinking about water in sheer utilitarian for human use. How can we meander towards a model of integrating cultural components in engineering? That's our task. That's your task. That's going from this Western model to a more Eastern model. This was a wonderful show about that, an artist show about the relationship between East and West and the different mentality of thinking. And actually one of our famous architects, Le Corbusier, maybe some of you have heard of him, maybe most of you not, but he was a very famous modernist architect who had all straight lines in his architecture. Even he thought actually that there was meander was important. The meander itself, besides meandering, it also became a very important aesthetic figure. This figure which you see, probably you know this figure, right? It's called the meander key. This figure is on every legal building from the 19th century or 20th century, or libraries and so forth. Very kind of signifying progress and control of nature, stratifying actually the meander itself. Maybe you see one aspect of this particular key pattern, which became, it was already in the ancient time called the meander key pattern. It was based upon that meandering, but also the stratifying of the meandering was very important for the art for Philip of Macedonia. You see here, oops, you go too fast, unfortunately. So this is the shield of Philip of Macedonia and Alexander the Great, all filled with meander symbol. Unfortunately, nowadays it's also being used by very right-wing folks in Greece. But again, I show that as an example how that same meandering, even the abstract notion of meandering, can meander in different directions. It can be a very positive sign, and it can be used as a kind of swastika sign. And unfortunately, both of them are possible, but that's our human condition. That's what we have to deal with this ambiguity, with this variety, with this difficulty, with this complexity. And that's the kernel of my talk. How can we create an engagement for complexity? Our time is a complex time. For many of us, there are many things, there are many natural entities, there are many infrastructural possibilities and choices. For me, meandering is a metaphor for moving through solution space, for an ethics, an ethos of adjustment, permanent changing. You permanently have to adjust to a new situation. That is symbolized by one of the Greek goddesses called Metis. Very important goddess. She was this symbol in many Greek texts for cunning intelligence. You've heard of Odysseus, right? Odysseus was called Polymetis. He had many different aspects of metis, of cunning intelligence. And she was the sister of meander. That's not by accident. That's a similar mentality. You guys see that after this talk? It is a mentality of, to say it's simply going with the flow, but it's a little bit more complex than that. It's dealing with uncertainty, with ambiguity, with instability. It means an inductive, analogical, and emergent thinking is as important as control and generalizability. These are all very crucial terms for an engineer to actually include these kind of terms in his or her planning. To have a framework of exploration, a rethinking. Engineering, the word is relating to ingenuity. That is metis, ingenuity. Foregrounding metis instead of Apollo as clear and rational, reasonable thinking. This is another mode of rationality. That's what meander stands for in my philosophy. It's a cultural imagination of complexity and of diversity. Metis is symbolized not that much in Greek philosophy because she was eaten by Zeus because she was too smart. She was his wife, but she was too smart. Maybe you know that situation where a woman is smarter than a man. Not many men like that. It's changing a little bit. But he ate her because she was too smart for him. But she had already conceived of Athena, and so Athena was born out of his head, but actually was conceived by her. And so she was actually right there. And, this is not just a philosopher chatting or whatever. This National Science Project of Stream Restoration, they use similar language, like to restore streams means to have a sixth sense. Vague language. What are they meaning? Yeah. That's what we need. We need this capacity of ambiguity to really see what kind of unexpected aspects there are to our projects. I have a whole model for it. We're going to not look at that. This is the most important thing. Think, reconsider, re-meander, and then the world will be all rosy. Like this. Okay, any questions? Yes.
Governor Jerry Brown wants to develop tunnels that pump water from the San Joaquin Delta
Right.
down to Los Angeles. So I was just curious what your opinion was on that.
That's a really good question. It's so complex because, as you know, it's called the Bay Delta Conservation Plan. And so it's meant to actually change some of the flows of some of the rivers back into the delta, which is very, very important to restore that ecosystem. These are the most fertile ecosystem where fresh and salt water meet. This whole area was all wetlands, very, very fertile. Of course, there are virtually no wetlands left. So part of the plan is to prevent the sucking of the water all out of the delta immediately to Los Angeles. That's a good thing. But those huge tunnels and all the money that goes with it, I think it's very important that we rethink how we have it set up right now. We also know that Los Angeles needs water, that a lot of the farmers need water, but I think the last ones are probably an entity that might be in a difficult situation. Maybe agriculture in this region is not the most, the best use of the water, and given climate change, water will rise anyways, so you will get more saltwater intrusion in the whole Bay Area by definition. A lot of the agricultural lands will be taken out of production. You cannot endlessly build dikes around all these areas. I mean, my own country did it, but that was kind of, honestly, not the best hydrology. So, at some levels, I think there are some really good ideas behind it. Economically, it makes sense if you do the calculations. Then actually, even if a lot of those cities would put in water reuse or desalination plants, they would have to pay much more money than actually with this system, which is a $25 billion system. I mean, it's crazy. But we have to think about these things. So I don't have a simple answer. I would not say it's completely crazy. I like the conservation part of it. I don't necessarily, and it's not my area of expertise. I have read about it, but don't know exactly all the ins and outs of it. So I think it's a big step forward to have that conservation element and to have actually a program that actively tries to restore a particular ecosystem and again, the ecotone, they call it, that relationship between brackish water, salt water, and fresh water, is the most fertile ecosystem. So I'm happy that they have actually a lot of areas in this plan that we store that particular ecosystem. That's definitely a re-meandering in that sense, as I mentioned. If you need all those huge tunnels for that, I don't know if you can scale down that part of the plan and rethink. I mean, Los Angeles is pretty good in water, they have done a good job in lowering their water use. If you compare it with Dallas, I think they have now 110 gallons per person per day. Well, we have 260 gallons per person per day. So they have done a lot of work to lower that. But again, I'm afraid that the agricultural community might have to acknowledge that they need to, that agriculture is not the future for California, which is a hard thing to think about, you know, because that's where a lot of probably you folks, your parents make money. So how do we rethink that? That's your guys' future to think about that. How to think about it.
So that's a great note for us to finish on. We're out of time. Thank you very much.